You get me, get you. You get me, feel it, you. You get me, get you. You get me, feel it, you. You get me, get you. You get me.
Hello, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I'm your host, Corey Nathan. It's an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group. That's a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. And let's get right to it. I am so happy to be joined again after 4 years by Colonel David Lapan. David Lapan served more than 30 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, retiring in 2015 as a colonel. Colonel Lapan is a strategic communications advisor who, among other posts, was the spokesperson under then Secretary John Kelly at the Department of Homeland Security. Prior to that, he served as spokesperson for several Secretaries of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and for multinational forces during military operations in Haiti and Iraq, among other posts. It's great to be with you again, Dave. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Corey. Thanks.
So I'm really glad to that you had some time to join me again, and I have to ask you first things first. Now that hockey season started, looks like your Caps are off to a good start, huh? Oh no.
I was prepared for you. I heard you talking on one of your casts about your Rangers,
Yeah, that's right.
and you made reference to them getting shut out the other day, and that was probably when my Caps were up there
That's
in
right.
Madison Square Garden and shut them out. I was at the Caps Lightning game here at home last night. So,
Oh wow. So
yep.
do you think this is Ovechkin's last season, or?
He's being coy about it.
Yeah,
I think it ultimately will depend on how he feels by the end of the season, right?
yeah,
If he, God forbid, gets injured during the season, that might change his options or his decision making. But now that he's finally broken Wayne Gretzky's record, and you mentioned again when you were talking about your Kings,
yeah.
I have to say that when I lived in LA, I was a LA Kings fan when Gretzky played there.
Oh
So I got
wow.
to I got to see the Great One play, and now I've gotten to see the Great Eight play.
Oh man.
But he so Ovi is just adding to his record. Every game he plays. So
That's
we'll see
right.
how long he can stick with it. But based on last night's game, he was throwing his body around still.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to go hit people.
He still got it, just a few goals away from 900 if my count is correct. So
Yep.
going to be a
Yeah.
fun season. It's I've always respected his game. I'm not there's a couple other guys on that team that I won't name that I'm not as big of a fan of, but that's okay. It'll be a fun season. You know that game the other night, by the way, not to get too off track.
You're
It was
right.
a good game. I was pretty happy
It
with
was.
I mean, it's a measuring stick game, but the Rangers played a good, solid game, and that goalie, Lindgren, I think is his name,
Lynn,
he
yes, Charlie Lindgren. He was on fire that night.
stood on his head, man. That was awesome. All right,
Yep.
so hockey.
And
Grew up in Massachusetts. Did you? I forget. Did you enlist in the Marines right out of high school, or was it a little bit later?
I went to college for a couple of years, dropped out of college, and enlisted in the Marines. So I
Okay.
started my Marine Corps career at Parris Island, South Carolina, the infamous Parris Island. So I spent 2.5 years enlisted, and then went into an officer program, got my commission, and became an officer. And as you said, finished up in 2015 as a colonel.
Was that
So
something that you were
very
thinking about as a kid, or what prompted that decision to enlist?
It really wasn't, even though my dad was in the Navy. I was actually born in Southern California. I'm
Oh,
an actual native. My dad was stationed down at North Island in San Diego,
yeah,
and I was born in National City. Um, and then when he retired from the Navy, I was in second grade. So, early years of my life, but it wasn't something I grew up all the way into high school around the military.
yeah.
We moved to a small town in Massachusetts. So even though I had grown up as part of a military family early, um, I didn't really kind of have that as my path. In fact, I was the first one in my family to attend college.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of the path that I was on, was to play sports and go to college.
And then once you were in the Marines, did you have a specific interest in communications, what you ended up pursuing and really serving at high levels in? I mean, because you did a lot of education, Naval War College, Air War College. Was that something that you specifically went to school for, or did you discover that interest as you went along?
So without making this too long a story and taking
No,
up your
no,
entire
make it a
pod
long
with
story,
this.
man. That's what we're here
Now,
for.
um, so I initially served as an air traffic controller. Loved it, great experience. Ended up leaving active duty and going into the reserves, which is when I moved to LA and lived in Southern California.
Wait, let me pause you right there. So,
Yeah,
is my timeline correct? Because I remember vaguely, I was a little kid in early 80s, but didn't Reagan lay off a bunch of air traffic controllers? So, is
he
that
did.
you came, did you come in after that, or where were you in
Uh,
that timeline?
Yeah, the exact same time. So as it turned out, I was still new to air traffic control in the military. It was still in a training phase
Yeah.
when that happened. Reagan fired the air traffic controllers. Several of my more experienced colleagues left our military base and went to civilian airfields
Mm.
to fill in when the controllers were fired.
Oh,
So
wow.
several of my Marine colleagues ended up going and working in civilian air traffic control facilities because of President Reagan's decision on the controllers. I missed that again just because I was not fully trained at that point. So that was my little aside about ATC.
You know, what's interesting is as I was refreshing my memory and learning a lot of new things about your background, your professional trajectory, there were so many specific points of interest where you have a particularly informed perspective about things that are happening literally right now. For example, the shutdowns effect. I didn't even think about this until you just brought it up to my attention just now, is air traffic controllers.
Right.
So it's interesting. Um, sorry, I cut
So
you off.
yeah,
You were
no,
saying.
I left active duty and was in the reserves. Moved to LA. Was in LA in LA in Orange County. Was recalled from the reserves back to active duty for Desert Storm
Okay.
in 1990,
Ooh.
91.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was at El Toro down in Orange County, the Marine Corps Station, while that was still open. They've since closed that base. So I was down at El Toro for a while.
Right.
And then I decided to give up LA, move back to the East Coast to be closer to family and to finish my degree, which I had, left by the wayside when I enlisted in the Marines. And when I was growing up, I always wanted to be in journalism.
Oh,
I was more focused on like sports
okay.
writing and sports casting. So when I went back to school at Penn State, I was a broadcast journalism major.
Oh, okay.
And
They
so
have a
that,
really good school. Actually, the Democracy Group, which we're a part of, is based out of Penn State
oh,
University.
is that right?
The
Okay.
McCourtney School, is that, do I have that right?
No, it's the
So the journalism is different than what the Democracy Group is a part of, but a lot of their students are in the are on a journalism path. So
yeah. In fact, it's called the Belisario School
okay,
after Donald Belisario, a very famous Hollywood director, producer, etc.,
okay,
who was a Penn State grad. Anyway, so that's what kind of got me back on the journalism track, and so
right,
then I changed my military occupational specialty from aviation into public affairs.
okay,
So I became a public affairs officer at that point, still in the reserves. And then I came back. Actually, while I was still in the reserves, I was part of the Armed Forces inaugural committee for Bill Clinton's second inauguration.
okay.
And that's what moved me to the DC area. And then from there, I moved back onto active duty full time as a public affairs officer and did all those, great, amazing assignments that
Yeah.
you talked a little bit about.
I do have some questions about that, but so what was the focus of your studies at Naval War College and Air War College?
So those are what in the military we consider professional military education.
Okay.
So as you move up through the ranks, the officer ranks in particular, you go through these war colleges, which are essentially national security studies.
Okay.
So you are learning, history and theory all around military operations, national security, those things.
Oh,
So as again you move up the promotion ladder, you're expected to do those schools to further your military knowledge and education.
right, right. So as you say, you're in DC for Clinton's second inaugural. So but then early 2000s, I think, is when you were spokesperson for Department of Defense.
Yes. Yes.
So you saw that was a pretty critical time. I mean, so it was pre 9/11, I'm assuming, right?
It was. So here's the very interesting piece there. So within the DoD, the Pentagon press office, which is where I was assigned, uh, we broke things into accounts where, you know, one person in the office would have U.S. Southern Command,
Yeah.
somebody would have U.S. European Command. I had U.S. Central Command.
Okay.
So
CENTCOM, right?
CENTCOM,
Yeah.
right? And so in my 3 year tour from 2000 to 2003, as the CENTCOM guy in the DoD press office, we had the attack on the USS Cole, the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the start of the war in Afghanistan, and the start of the war in Iraq,
Wow. That's
all during that 3 year period that I was in the DoD press office.
right, right. You had no idea what you were getting into, but
None whatsoever.
the phrase trial by fire comes to mind, but is that insensitive of me to say?
No,
Um,
it was, yeah.
well, again, one of those bits of that you played a significant program that you played a part in that I couldn't help but think of what's happening right now as you speak. You played a key role in forming the media embed program. Do I remember that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
How,
So in late 2002, early 2003, as the country, but specifically the military, were preparing for possible combat operations in Iraq. So the
yeah,
President Bush hadn't yet made the decision, but in the military, we're always planning, be ready for any contingency. So as part of that planning, my boss, Victoria Clark, who is Tory Clark, who was the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs to Donald Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time,
right.
started planning to create a large program to embed media into our combat formations if we were indeed going to war in Iraq. And so part of my role in the press office was to help develop that program. I actually flew down to Tampa to CENTCOM headquarters, met with the folks there as they were doing their war planning, and basically carried the message from the Pentagon, hey, we are going to embed media with us. How many can you take? How many can you take? How many, right, can you handle? And over the course of time, hundreds of what we called at the time news media representatives, because they weren't just all reporters. They were
Right.
cameramen, they were sound people, they were, radio, they were represented all the different forms of medium. And it was both US based and international. And so we put hundreds of news media representative journalists with Navy units, with Air Force units, with Army units, with Marine Corps units in all phases of the campaign in Iraq.
Right, right. It occurs to me that politicians want to control the story, but it seems that the objective of the professionals, yourself and Victoria, I'm sorry, Victoria
Clark,
Clark.
Victoria Clark, right?
It seems to me that was more of maybe leaned into a little bit more transparency. Am I looking at it through rose-colored glasses there? Or?
No, you're right. Although I will say that as much criticism as Donald Rumsfeld has received over the years for various things,
Yeah.
he was also, and this wouldn't have happened without his support, he was the Secretary of Defense. He understood that if we were going into Iraq, we would be facing the Saddam Hussein regime, which was well known for propaganda, which was well known for disinformation and misinformation. And collectively, he and the senior leadership decided the best way to counter that is by having independent news gatherers, reporters, journalists on the battlefield to be able to tell the truth about what was happening while Saddam and his crew were spreading lies about what was happening. And there was a very famous split screen early on where Saddam's spokesman, who we affectionately referred to as Baghdad Bob, was doing a press conference in Baghdad and essentially saying, there are no enemy troops anywhere around here. We're all safe. We've, vanquished the enemy, etc. And then on the split screen, there was a TV reporter inside Baghdad saying, we're about a mile away with U.S. troops from where he's speaking.
Yeah.
So here's the proof that what they're trying to put out is a lie, because I'm with U.S. troops and they're inside the city of Baghdad, and here's what's going on. So Secretary Rumsfeld and Tory Clark saw the need to use, I don't want to say use in a pejorative way, but to leverage the media as a way to counter what we were going to face. And frankly, Secretary Rumsfeld also said at the time, look, bad things are going to happen. It's war. Bad things will always happen. We've got to be ready to have exposure to the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're going to tell the American public and the global public important, because we had, Al Jazeera and other Middle East based Arabic speaking news organizations that we embedded as well, because it wasn't supposed to be, here's just what the US is saying. Here's what the global media is saying, because they're getting a firsthand view of what's happening on the ground.
Right, right. It seems that there were a number of different stakeholders, not just the folks, the people of Afghanistan and Iraq, but the administration, the Department of Defense, the American people, the press. In retrospect, do you believe that the program served its purposes for all those different stakeholders?
I absolutely do. And I've seen and heard criticism over the years that we created the program to sort of create a Stockholm syndrome
Oh,
amongst the reporters, that they would somehow feel sympathetic because we are, protecting them,
mm,
which we were, but that they would somehow pull their punches or not tell the truth because they felt beholden to us. That's just a bunch of bunk. Um, it served the purpose for what I described. It allowed people around the world to see firsthand and to hear firsthand from not the government, not Saddam's government, and not our government,
yeah,
frankly, but from independent reporters explaining what was happening in
right,
real time.
right. Later, you had even more senior level jobs at the Pentagon. One of your duties was to prep both Secretary Gates and Secretary Panetta for press conferences. I'd love for you to take us inside the room. How do you prepare a cabinet secretary for media appearances, for example?
Sure. A lot of it has to do with, as you might imagine, doing homework, right? So that you can prepare them. And the way that we went about that was talking to the Pentagon press corps, right?
Yeah,
The ones that are there in the building that are going to show up and ask questions. Because it doesn't do
that makes so much
ultimately.
sense. So you were listening to some of my interviews, so you could prep for this. That's great.
But again, the idea that you want, it doesn't do anyone any good, to
Right.
include the American public, if at the press conference, the senior leader, whether it's the secretary, the chairman, whoever it is, gets a question and says, I don't know,
Mm,
or I'll have to get back to you, right? So with reporters, they're not giving away everything, but they're going to say, hey, I want to ask a question about Iraq,
yeah.
about specifically this, right? So that way we can make sure that the secretary or whoever it is that we're prepping has the information at hand and knows how to answer the question, because they're expected. Now, again, they never share exact questions with us. We're not prepping in advance. We're just saying, tell us the topics you're interested in so we can make sure that we've got the answers. And in one of my roles, when I was the acting deputy assistant secretary for media operations, I conducted what were known as gaggles, which was an on the record but off camera engagement with the Pentagon press corps.
Okay.
And what that meant is every day of the week, Monday through Friday, excuse me, the press corps came into my office at the Pentagon and basically played stump the chump for 15, 20 minutes or however
Wow.
long it took.
Yeah.
But one, it was my opportunity to get out information that we wanted to provide. For example, I remember we were doing humanitarian relief efforts in Pakistan during one period. And so I started off the gaggle by saying, here's our latest operational update. We're doing, this many flights. We've delivered this many, packages. We're doing, right. And I could start off by saying, here's the information we want you to have. Now, what are your questions for me? And they could ask follow-up questions about Pakistan. They could ask about Afghanistan. They could ask about, missile defense, pretty much anything. And so I use that as an example because every day I had to prepare to be ready to answer anything. It
Right.
wasn't just a one topic conversation. And you do the same thing for press conferences for the secretary and the chairman to have them be ready to answer questions from any angle. And the other interesting part is people people think of the Pentagon press corps as being a very homogeneous sort of a bunch of American reporters, right? It's the Washington Post, it's CNN, it's we had international journalists, we had Pakistanis, we had Indians, we had Japanese, we had Korean news organizations, we had Al Jazeera, we had organizations based in the Middle East. So not only did you have to be prepared to answer questions from U.S. based media, but also international media. So it really spanned a whole variety of topics. And so preparing those principles are thinking through what questions might we get, which ones do we expect, and it's not always just doing a little informal poll of the reporters. Sometimes it's just looking into seeing what's in the news, right?
Yeah.
We become educated over time that when I look and when I was preparing for Gaggles, I spent the first couple of hours just in study looking at all the news, thinking, okay, they're probably going to ask me about this because this is newsworthy. Hey,
Yeah.
they're going to probably ask me about this. So then I would go to the staff in the press office and say, hey, I need facts on this topic, or hey, I need the latest update on this topic. So I had that stuff either in writing or in my head when they started asking questions.
Yeah, the other thing I would imagine is the preparation is different based on how different the principles are. I just think of the last few secretaries of defense. Leon Panetta is a very different person than even Secretary Gates, the two principals that you dealt with, let alone Pete Hegseth and Donald Rumsfeld, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And the same thing when I was doing preparation for other senior leaders within the department, the undersecretary for policy, for
Right.
example, you have to fit to their experience, their personality, lots of things. So you don't just consider, the topics. You consider the individual that's going to be delivering the message, that's going to be talking about these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rumsfeld was famously, adversarial with the press, not in anywhere near what we're seeing in today's environment. But
Right.
uh,
Yeah, I can't help but think of several interviews that Vice President Vance gave on Sunday, just this last Sunday as we're recording this. But pretty much every interview that I see him give, unless it's his podcast, or
right,
from friendly media, but almost every interview I see him give, it's not only adversarial, he's actually directing the interviewer. Well, what you should be asking is, and just different tactics that are deployed there. So, how would you choose would you choose to sign on to a job if you felt that the principal didn't align with certain ethics in terms of how newsmakers should engage with the press?
absolutely not.
Okay.
And you mentioned earlier that I spent some time in the first Trump administration at the Department of Homeland Security. General John Kelly, who I had served together in the Marines,
I
we
was
had known each other for years and had a relationship. When he was nominated to be the Secretary of Homeland Security, he contacted me and asked me to come and be his press secretary. I did so despite having frankly, some misgivings about the new Trump administration back then in the first term and sort of
Yeah.
how they treated the press generally. But I knew that General Kelly, who then became Secretary Kelly, would never ask or expect me to compromise my principles, my integrity, or frankly, my reputation that I had built over years of dealing with the media at the Pentagon and frankly around the world. So when he left to go to the White House, I no longer had that relationship. I worked for a little while for the acting secretary, Elaine Duke, who was our deputy secretary. We had a good relationship. Obviously, it didn't go back years like General Kelly and I. Um, but I knew over time that I would be asked and expected to, treat the media as the enemy, attack the press, do those
Yeah.
things. And so I resigned because I knew that I could not do that.
Well, to be fair, the looking back at that first term, the first Trump term, there were a lot of good people who worked in that administration at the highest levels. And we've seen even more, post first term. John Kelly is General John Kelly, and then Secretary Kelly is a great example. But all throughout, but all at all levels of different departments. So could you share a little bit about what it was like working for Secretary Kelly at that time? And then I have a follow-up question for compare and contrast. There's a lot of compare and contrast, but I want to get inside of that. Get inside of that job. We've learned so much about him after his time in the administration, but I'd love to know from your perspective.
So, a couple of things specific to my role as the press secretary in dealing with media is very early on, he charged me with engaging with the press and helping him to engage with the press. Because again, we both came from the Marine Corps, which actually is pretty well known for engaging with the media and engaging with Congress. In fact, General Kelly, in one of his assignments when he was a one-star general, was the head of legislative affairs for the Marine Corps. So we both believe strongly on the need to provide information to the public and the press and Congress. So we both had that same mindset. The other thing was he not only encouraged, but basically gave me the top cover to start doing press briefings at Homeland Security, which had not been done before. So I had come from the Pentagon doing these gaggles every day. Now we didn't have a press corps at Homeland Security the way we did at the Pentagon, both in terms of size and scope, but also being in the building. But we found a building that was part of Homeland Security where the press could come, and I would do briefings, press briefings. And Secretary Kelly did as well, and he did interviews. And so both of us together saw the importance of keeping the public informed about what we were doing, and the press was the conduit to reach the public. And so doing briefings, doing interviews, doing press conferences, all of that went into that, his approach and my approach based on him.
So what I'm curious about is, once Secretary Kelly left to become chief of staff, you served with an interim DHS secretary. But I forget the timeline, but did you work under the newly appointed secretary for a time?
I did not.
Okay.
So when she being Kirsten Nielsen,
right,
who I had worked with, because
Yeah.
she was General Kelly's, or Secretary Kelly's chief of staff
okay,
at the beginning. So I had worked with her in that capacity.
okay.
She went with him over to the White House. And then that's when she was later nominated to become the Homeland Security Secretary. But I had left by the time that happened.
That's interesting. So this ties into something else I'm dying to know. But before I ask that next question, from what you've seen of Trump 2.0, this administration, how different is this administration in terms of its personnel as well? There was a theme that I was seeing emerge. Sorry to kind of interrupt my question, but I'm just kind of thinking out loud. In reading a lot of your past writing, I don't know if you said it exactly this way, but there was a tension that I saw you working through, and the tension was between bureaucratic competence versus political prioritization. Do you know what I mean by that?
Right.
And am I right to recognize that that's what you were trying to balance? So that's really what my question is. As you observe this, the current administration, how are you seeing the compare and contrast compared to, say, the time that you served under General and then Secretary Kelly?
So as you said, the political priority and the bureaucratic, operations, right?
Yeah.
That's the way our government operates.
Right.
It always has. And so while President Trump has, repeatedly attacked what he has termed the deep state, those are the career folks that have kept the government going through transitions year in, year out, decades, right? That you have a core folks that know the work, know the job. Now, when the political leadership changes, the folks that are career and the military folks, frankly, who are in a different category than the civilian, civil servants, you follow the direction of the new leadership, but you bring with that job insight, experience, and things like that to help inform the process.
Institutional knowledge.
Exactly. And so you may have a new leader that comes in, whether it's a Secretary of Defense or even, a Tory Clark, an assistant secretary that says, here's how we're going to do things. But you have a dialogue that says, we tried doing that before and here's what happened, or, based on the experience, here's what we think. And you have this dialogue rather than just blindly following, what somebody says. In the end, our system of government is based on political leadership. Right? That's why we have elections. We change, governments, repeatedly. But the civil servants, the institutional knowledge, aren't there to stand in the way of that political direction, but are there to provide the best advice based on experience. And it's something in the military context that we call, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff provides his best military advice to the commander-in-chief, right? Commander-in-chief makes the decision,
right?
Not the chairman, but the chairman comes in with decades of experience doing military operations, these things, and can inform the dialogue as decisions are being formulated, as policies are being formulated. We all understand that ultimately the decision maker decides, but you want to have a process that allows for a variety of ideas to be bounced around and have these discussions. And that's the role of the bureaucracy. I hate the fact that term bureaucracy, which actually has, a very established, well-defined meaning, has become pejorative, right? This idea that people that work in government are lazy or are just collecting a paycheck. Are there people like that in government? Yes. Are there people like that in every walk of life? Absolutely.
Sure.
It's no different. But the vast majority of people are there to serve the people in the government and have done it for a long time. And so I think the demonization of the folks that have worked in government, the civil servants, and then either a lack of understanding or a misunderstanding of what they actually contribute and how they do is what's most unfortunate about this. And it does appear that the president has surrounded himself by people who are just going to do what he says without any, pushback, any discussion, any, providing other points of view to help form the decision rather than just march out and do what I say.
So you had to make some hard decisions, even within that first year of the first term. How do you strike the balance in terms of faithfully representing the positions of the administration or your department without breaching your own sense of integrity? Do you have a prism for that? How do you make those decisions for yourself?
So, number one, the North Star is the truth, right? Tell the truth. And when you can't tell the truth, explain why you can't tell the truth, right? So there may be an instance where a reporter asks me about something that we are working on. It hasn't yet been decided. We haven't actually, again, in the Homeland Security, I'm aware of a lot of discussions that are going on within the building leading up to a decision, for example.
Yeah.
Reporters get wind of, we're considering X, Y, or Z. If we haven't made the decision, I can't tell you if it's X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
right? So I can stick to the truth by saying, look, that is still being discussed. We have not made a decision.
Yeah.
And then once a decision is made, do I have the authority to divulge that?
Hmm.
Because remember I mentioned earlier, we also have an obligation to Congress, right? So if a question comes up and I'm asked about something that has recently been decided that we haven't yet told Congress that we're doing, then I'm in a bad spot if I get out in front of that notification,
Yeah.
or I get out in front of the secretary or the president who wants to make that announcement, right? And so in those instances, I may know the truth, but I may not be able to reveal the truth for any number of reasons. And I always fell back on explaining why,
Yeah.
right? And I always used to train others that if you know something, say it. If you don't know it, say you don't know.
Hmm.
And if you can't say it, say you can't say it and explain why.
So I appreciate that the North Star is the truth, and if you can't share the truth, explain why. Um, Now, I wouldn't ask you to put yourself in the shoes of folks who are representing some of the decisions that have been made here just in the last few weeks, but I would like to know a little bit more about um, whether how big of a difference there might be in how you handle hard questions like that, like when you can't uh, share the truth for legitimate reasons, how you might handle that differently from the podium publicly versus whether there are off the record conversations happening with individual reporters. Does that am I watching too much
No,
West Wing or?
no, no, that you're absolutely right. And a lot of that revolves, as in many things in life, is relationships,
Yeah.
right? And so in the years that I worked at the Pentagon, got to know the Pentagon reporters, they got to know me. Um, we had a trust relationship.
Yeah.
And it got to the point that if I told them I couldn't tell them something, they trusted I was telling them the truth.
Yeah.
They didn't think that I was lying, right? And it may be that after the fact they say, "Hey, I just had to ask you that question, but I understand why you couldn't answer it,"
Yeah.
right? Because of that relationship. If you don't have it, that makes it much tougher to do those types of things. I have frequently told this story. The first day that I did a gaggle, so I'm a uniformed military officer. I'm a colonel in the Marine Corps. Previous deputy assistant secretaries have been civilians, um, now career civilians, not political appointees, but uh, it made for a little bit of challenge in that job. And I had a reporter on the first day say, "Colonel Lapan, as a serving military officer, is it appropriate for you to defend administration policy?"
Yeah.
And I said, "No, it's not. And if you have questions of that nature, then you talk to my counterpart, who is the civilian spokesperson for the secretary. But if you have military related questions, all day long, yes."
Okay.
So I was able to bifurcate it in that way. And it didn't put me in a bad position as a military officer to try to defend what decisions were being made in a political lens.
Yeah. Um, there are a number of events, current events that I'd love to ask you about. Um, I already alluded to the first one. I'd love to pick your brain about. In recent days and weeks, um, Pete Hegseth has imposed restrictions on press access to the Pentagon. It requires journalists to sign a pledge promising not to seek or publish any information that hasn't been officially authorized for release. And in fact, news organizations, I haven't checked the news this morning on any of the latest developments, but news organizations that refuse to sign the pledge risk losing their credentials and access to the building. What are your thoughts on these developments?
So, first, if I could, let me give you and the listeners a little bit of background on how that works in practice. Because again,
Okay.
I was there for many years.
Yeah.
The Pentagon Press Corps, and there are little bits of difference in terms of people that cover the Pentagon that are part of the press corps, but don't have physical offices inside the building.
Okay.
Okay. So when you talk about credentials, it's those that come into the building day in and day out.
Yeah.
They have an office that the department has set aside for those news organizations, for their reporters, their cameramen, their producers, etc., to be in the Pentagon, not in the bureau or somewhere else.
Right.
You have other reporters that are considered part of the Pentagon press corps that don't come in the building every day. They work from their bureaus or whatever, but they're still covering the building. And if they want to come in for a press briefing or something, they get a visitor pass, right? So the difference is credentialed media are those that work inside the building, and then you have other reporters that are covering the Department of Defense that will come in as needed.
Yeah.
On a time to, as needed. So the credentialed media, until this recent new policy, would have the ability to walk around the Pentagon. They wore their badge, so it clearly identified them as press.
Yeah.
Secretary Hegseth has mischaracterized the nature of the Pentagon in that it's this big, giant classified information space. It's not. It's a bunch of offices. Now, some of those offices are considered what we call SCIFs, or secure compartmentalized information facilities. Restricted access, you can only be in there. A lot of the doors have codes that you have to use to get in. They are basically like rooms that are safes. You have to have a combination to get in to even access that information.
And you have to leave your cell phones and all that. Yeah.
Exactly. And it may be that that's in one part of an office, and in another part of an office, it's just an office.
Right.
And I could, so when I was the public affairs officer to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, right, the senior military officer in the United States, I had an office where the media could come in to my desk, to my office, and talk to me. They couldn't go behind that door because that's where my SCIF was.
Right.
That's where all my classified information was kept. And if I was in my office with classified information, I kept my door closed and I let my staff know, nobody just comes in, right? And then if I needed to talk to somebody, I went and locked up the secure information, right? So this idea that the Pentagon is one giant SCIF is just inaccurate.
Yeah.
There are public tours of the Pentagon. They have been going on for decades. So the public now they are escorted by somebody who's also giving them a tour. Here's where this is, here's this, right? They're pointing out the landmarks and the various things inside the Pentagon, but they're walking around in the press. The corridors themselves aren't this big secure facility. So the credentialed press know which part of the Pentagon they can go to and which parts they couldn't, which parts are restricted because of classified information and which parts aren't. So there's no need to further restrict them or to have them be escorted everywhere they go, except for a few, minor exceptions. And here's the important part, Corey, that people need to understand. The responsibility for protecting classified information resides with the person who has the clearance, right? So I'm responsible to make sure that classified information doesn't get to somebody who's not authorized to receive it, whether it's you, whether it's my mom, whether it's a reporter, right?
Yeah.
It's my responsibility. And so Pentagon employees who have access to classified information in various forms shouldn't be talking in the lunch line about
or
classified
on Signal.
information. Right, or on Signal, or in the bathroom. So this idea that the reporters are somehow ferreting out classified information because they're able to walk around. Again, they are walking around and they're talking to people that work in the building. And if there's any classified information, that individual shouldn't be sharing it.
Yeah.
And if they do, that's who's accountable, not the reporter. So if the reporter asks me a question about something, and it's not as if Pentagon reporters are going to say, hey, Dave, what's the latest classified information you can tell me?
Yeah.
right?
Right.
They're going to say, hey, and to your comment about Signal, perfect example. So in the now infamous Signal, where Secretary Hegseth shared information with people who were not authorized to receive classified information. Now, he and the White House have claimed that that information is not classified. All of us who have worked in this business saw that information and said, that is absolutely classified.
Right.
And here's the example. Had a reporter come to me and I knew, based on classified, information that I was privy to in my role as a spokesperson, that we were preparing to conduct military operations in Iran. And I knew those kind of details that showed in that. And a reporter came to me and said, hey, we hear that the military might be ginning up some operations in Iraq. What can you tell me? What am I going to say? I can't tell you a damn thing.
Right.
Right? I'm not going to say, well, I can tell you what time the strike packages are going to be launched because that's not classified.
No,
Of course
because
it's classified.
yeah,
So
yeah.
again, this idea that people are going to spill classified information, it's the responsibility of the person. It's the accountability that I have as a holder of that security clearance to protect that information. It's not the reporter's job
Right.
to do so. There's no prohibition against the reporter getting access to classified information. The fault is with the person that provided it to them.
Yeah. So just to share a couple things, I think it was you. There was a report that came out a few weeks ago, actually, before certain members of the press were announcing that they were going to refuse to sign these restrictions. And the piece starts with the latest restrictions on Pentagon reporters by Secretary Pete Hegseth are unconstitutional, un-American, and damaging to our military. And what I really appreciated, one of my favorite sentences in the English language, just after that, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. It's right there in the First Amendment, man.
Absolutely. And so the irony here, Corey, is that the American military, which swears an oath, I swore that oath many times over the course of my 30 plus years, to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies.
Constitution.
Right?
Yeah.
Constitution. Right in First Amendment, as you said, freedom of the press, freedom of speech.
Yeah.
We, the military, have helped to defend that over the years. Many people at the risk and the loss of lives to protect our freedoms. And so the idea that the very military that swears an oath to protect the Constitution is being, harangued in a way that takes away freedom of the press and freedom of speech, blamed for things like leaks, restrictions that, again, are just going to provide obstacles. Here's another key piece. The DoD principles of information, which have existed for decades. And this that I'm going to read you is a current version, because at the beginning of it, it talks about the Department of WAR, which I refuse to say the actual name because it's ridiculous. But in the policy, which exists today because of the way that that is worded, information will not be classified or otherwise withheld to protect the government from criticism or embarrassment. That is in the DoD regulation.
Right.
So all of this talk of keeping information that's unclassified from the press points exactly to that. The reason you would do that is because it might cause you embarrassment.
Right.
I'm sure the fact that somebody leaked that Signal chat, although we know how it was leaked by inadvertently including a reporter.
Yeah.
But all of those discussions afterward were because information got out, and the fact that it got out became an embarrassment to the government. That's not a reason to withhold it, right? The American people deserve to know. Do they deserve to know classified information in advance? No, there are laws that protect against that.
Yeah.
But do they deserve to know information about how their sons and daughters that they've sent us to serve in uniform are being trained and how they're being deployed and what's happening to them? Do the American people deserve to know how their dollars are being spent on weapon systems and equipment and things like that? Absolutely. And if there's a big cost overrun that would be embarrassing if it was detailed, so be it. The public has a right to know that and needs to know that. So this idea of controlling even unclassified information and telling reporters you can't even have unclassified information is such an overreach and is so antithetical to everything we've done for decades in the Department of Defense. Again, the principles of information, the way that we've operated, the key wording in that principles of information are to make timely and accurate information available to the public. That's how we do it.
It seems like a strong arm attempt to turn the entire press corps into a PR firm for the administration. And while some outlets are willing to oblige, folks, that's not the role of the press.
Right. And you mentioned you hadn't seen the latest news. The one that I'm tracking is there's been only one news organization, OAN, that has agreed. Every other
even
news
Newsmax
organization to include Newsmax and Fox refused to sign it.
Great. That's good.
And I think that sends a very strong signal. This isn't about, people or news organizations that are considered left-leaning or right-leaning. That's the other thing. When I dealt with the Pentagon press over all those years, it was immaterial which news organization they belonged to. I answered questions for all of them.
Yeah.
I didn't favor one over the other based on their, perceived bias in one direction or another. It wasn't partisan. It wasn't political the way that we've, become today. It's about freedom of information to get out to the people, and we're not picking and choosing who gets that information. Here's another great example I just read before we get on, Corey. The story about some of these latest layoffs amongst the federal government. And so the Department of Health and Human Services, for example, after they fired a bunch of people and then 2 days later,
rehired,
no, that was a mistake. You come back. The agency and the government never explained how many people, what organizations they belong to, et cetera. A news organization got a hold of the numbers and published them. Why shouldn't they?
Right.
That's not classified.
That's
People
right.
should know that. And the fact that the government was unwilling to release that information shouldn't make it stop there.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
So that's a good example of how information that isn't classified, isn't harmful, is basic information that the government should be providing. When they're not providing it, you get it from other sources.
Yeah.
But people are going to have to, and here's the thing. People in the United States, their trust and credibility of institutions, from religion to political leaders to the military to the banks, right?
Education. Yeah.
All of them have been decreasing.
Right.
Some more than others, but all of them are decreasing. So for the public, who do you trust? Well, people would say, well, they don't trust the media, so we have to protect that information. You know who they don't trust? You.
That's right.
They don't trust you anymore. So if you're the only source of information, that's not necessarily trustworthy, right? You have to earn that trust and that credibility. And I would argue, not just, in this current environment, in this administration, but it has been degrading, over years of people not trusting the Department of Defense and federal institutions. And so they have to, the media goes to other sources. And then the public needs to figure out, who do I believe, right?
Yeah, no, I was thinking when you were, as you rightly mentioned, that outlets like Fox News and Newsmax didn't sign on to those those new regulations. Um, there are good reporters. There are good journalists at all different outlets. Just like you mentioned, bureaucrats or bureaucratic institutions. My parents were in education their whole careers. Most people that they worked with wanted to be there because they had a passion for teaching kids and having an impact on young people's lives. But in every school, there were inevitably a couple folks that were there to collect a paycheck, as you described it. So I would say that with the media, with all the different institutions that are under attack right now, I have so many things that I wanted to ask you about, but I'm afraid that we're I could keep you here for a half a dozen hours at least. But one other thing I did want to ask you about. The AP summarized it this way: addressing an audience of military brass abruptly summoned to Virginia, Quantico. Trump outlined a muscular and at times norm-shattering view of the military's role in domestic affairs. He was joined by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who declared an end to woke culture and announced new directives for troops that include gender-neutral or male-level standards for physical fitness, among a lot of other things that were said that day. I really just wanted to understand what you thought about the event itself and what your impressions were of the actual speeches that Hegseth and Trump gave that day.
Um, so, in my opinion, it was all theater. There was
Hmm.
no reason to call all these senior military leaders, both officer and enlisted, from all across the world, taking them away from their primary duties to come and be lectured,
Yeah.
right? This could have been an email. If this was going to be a policy of the Department of Defense, you put it in a memo and you send it out to everybody. That's the way things are done. Having them all come together to, and again, here's the other part, for that to be televised shows me again that this was all for theater. If you were going to have an honest conversation with your senior military leaders, you wouldn't invite cameras in and then show this. Now, some could argue, well, it's just for transparency. No, that wasn't the reason. Again, the purpose of this was to intimidate, was to um, put all of those ideas, that the military was somehow woke, that we're a weak military because, of these past policies, and we're not going to do that anymore. All of that could have been conveyed in ways that weren't political theater, and that's exactly what it was. The president's remarks were rambling, were all over the map. It's embarrassing, frankly.
Yeah.
Um, Pete Hegseth is a guy that was a major in the National Guard. They're giving lectures to 4 and 3-star generals and senior enlisted leaders that have been in combat, that have fought for this country for decades. You don't get to be a 3 or 4-star general or a senior enlisted without having spent at least 2 decades in the military. And if you've been in the military the last 2 decades, you've been in war,
Yeah.
you've been in combat. They don't need lessons from
A
the political appointees. Again, a junior officer when
yeah.
he was in the National Guard, about standards, about fitness, about woke, whatever that means. Again, that's another one of these terms that's been uh, turned on its head. So I think the whole thing was unnecessary. I think this whole policy on restricting the press is unnecessary, and they're both dangerous. I mean, thankfully, nothing happened while all of those senior
Right.
leaders
Yeah.
were in Quantico.
Yeah.
Fortunately, they have competent people behind
Yeah.
that were keeping their eye on the ball and watching what was going on in the world. But for our adversaries, great opportunity to take advantage, and they're always looking for an opportunity to take advantage, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And they only have to be right once, which is what happened on 9/11.
Something that you wrote in July of 2020, no, not July of 2025, but July of 2020, was really striking in how I don't think you would have wanted to have been as prescient as you were, but here's what you wrote. I've followed the Trump administration's heavy-handed responses to protests across the country in recent months, and especially DHS's role in that response. And I'm appalled by what I'm seeing. It's damaging to DHS and it's damaging to American democracy. So I can only imagine what you're thinking as you're watching the deployment of National Guard troops in LA, DC, Chicago, Portland. What do you think what do you think? I can't expect you to speak for this administration, but what are what are their stated goals and what are the actual goals of such tactics, you think?
So the stated goals are to, take anybody who's in the country unlawfully, right? So whether they cross the border without inspection or they overstayed visas, because there are a number of ways that you can be here, unlawfully. Although most of the focus is on the border, to eject those people from the country. And despite what they say about the worst of the worst, we know from data that that's not true, that they are deporting people that don't have violent histories, and in some cases, the only crime that they committed. And this is another good reminder for people. Being into the country unlawfully, crossing the border without inspection is it's a misdemeanor. This isn't a crime as if these are hardened criminals.
Yeah.
Right? So so technically, are they here unlawfully? Did they break the law? Yes. But many people who have lived lawfully in this country since then, did they really deserve to be deported? Again, can be discussed. So the stated goal is to take people here considered unlawfully and send them back to their home countries or to some other countries. The clear purpose is fear. It's to create fear and to create division. And the one thing that I would add to what I wrote in 2020 is not only damage to DHS and to our country and our democracy, is damage to our military.
To the troops.
Yes. So using U.S. troops on U.S. soil against U.S. citizens, it's just unfathomable. And that's where, and the other piece to that, Corey, is that, and I did point this out, 4 or 5 years ago when DHS officers were dressed in military style uniforms, in camouflage uniforms, wearing body armor and such. It created the impression that that was the U.S. military.
Mm.
So now we have the same thing happening where federal law enforcement are dressing and equipping themselves like U.S. combat troops on the streets of America, as well as National Guard troops. And it creates the impression, not just the impression when it's, actual National Guard, but certainly an impression when it's federal law enforcement dressed to look. So when people see videos of citizens being dragged down to the ground and, zip tied by somebody wearing a helmet and body armor and camouflage, how are they supposed to know that that's not the military?
Right.
That that's federal law enforcement. It's blurring the lines in a way that's very dangerous and damaging to the military. And again, its real intent is to create fear and division, and we collectively, as a citizenry, can't stand by and allow that to happen.
So one of the things I'm really concerned about is a lot of National Guard troops have extensive training, education, ethics training. Not that we shouldn't be concerned about these deployments, but with the aggressive expansion of ICE, I'm afraid that we have not well-trained people on the ground without the proper preparation, that they're brazenly saying, well, they'll get training, in action. That leaves us all exposed, not just the folks who are part of ICE, but the people on the ground, the people, so much collateral damage, and it's just it seems unnecessary. So that's my commentary. I don't know what you think about that.
No, it is unnecessary. It's a powder keg. This is also something that I've said, that DHS was going to have to lower standards.
Yeah.
to get the number of people hired that they want. And they have. They've gotten rid of age standards. They've gotten rid of other things. As you said, the training has been compressed. They're putting people out on the streets that don't have years and years of experience. Here's a key point. In the first Trump administration, one of the first executive orders the president signed on immigration directed Homeland Security to hire thousands of new, at that point, Border Patrol, because the border was more, the focus than ICE.
Yeah.
They never got anywhere near that number.
Right.
And so the only way to reach those kind of numbers, 10,000 people, is to lower standards and to take whomever you can. And I'm concerned that people are coming into those jobs for the wrong reasons. And I worry about the lack of oversight to them doing their jobs properly.
There's so much, as I mentioned, there's so much to cover. We haven't even gotten to Kristi Noem's video that she sent to that like a political campaign ad, basically, that she sent out for airports to show that we haven't talked about the strikes on boats in the Caribbean. But I'd love to know, are you in touch with a lot of the men and women that you served with in the Marines? I'm asking because I'm wondering if there's the same kind of divisiveness that we see in the larger public. Are you able to talk about some of these issues with folks, or have you had to end certain relationships because there are some folks that you served with that have become radicalized, or just curious about your longtime colleagues and friends?
Yeah, it's both, right? So I haven't ended friendships, but there are those that I'm keeping at arm's length if they demonstrate that they have more radical views.
Yeah.
That's the one thing, is that today it's no longer, Democrat or Republican, right? You can talk to people that are in the mainstream of either of those parties.
Right.
But it's the one at the fringes, and especially on the MAGA right, that it's hard to even have a logical conversation with them. And a lot of it has to do, frankly, with, I believe, the amount of dis and misinformation that's out there.
Right.
Because I think people just they're getting a view of things that are skewing their perspectives. And it's harder than ever to convince people otherwise. And to the point of, the name of your podcast, I wish we could get to the point that people could have logical, reasoned conversations. It seems to be getting farther away from us. And the one other point that I'll make, and going back quickly to Secretary Hegseth, is that one thing he said early on was, I think our strength, talking about the military, is our unity. Yet he is doing things that sow division,
right,
within the military and with the American public. So it's not about unity; it's about division, and I worry about what it's doing to the country.
Yeah.
And I worry about what it's doing to our military specifically.
Yeah, it's not about a lack of unity, but he's forgetting the first part of that phrase, e pluribus unum, right?
Right, exactly.
So it's both end. It's a great way to segue into what we call our TP&R question. That is, what do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences? So just as an example, just yesterday, one of my best friends posted about the quote unquote Fedsurrection. And I didn't even engage about it, just reminding him that on January 6, 2021, the guy who was still in charge was Donald Trump. So, but that aside, so
right.
How do you engage with people, nurture relationships with people across different backgrounds and beliefs who get their news from different sources? How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other, or is it even possible?
So I think a key to that is the interpersonal, right? It's so easy on social media, right?
Yeah.
So again, I see things on social media platforms from friends and people I know, and I just like shake my head.
Yeah.
Now, if I could have a conversation with them in person, I think it would be different. But so many people are um, seem empowered to go on and say things on social media that they wouldn't say to somebody's
Right.
face,
Yeah.
right? And I can remember posting, and again, I got heat for some of the things I said, as you alluded to in the past, about President Trump and military and things like that. And I had, people attack me, and my response was, if you want to disagree with my position, that's fine.
Yeah.
If you've got a different view, that's fine, but don't attack me personally.
Sure.
You don't even know me, right? But it gives these people some sense of empowerment to just attack people anonymously. Uh, these ad hominem attacks that people do against one another. If we could just stop talking to one another on social media, and get rid of these attacks, and meet people face to face, and have, and even at the end of the day, if you don't agree, that's fine, but at least you're not fighting one another.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Holding each other, well, just holding myself to the standard of seeing the humanity in the people that I come in contact with. And the ways to do that is if I find myself using social media as a tool to embolden myself to be inhumane to someone, then that's on me. So yeah, it does get frustrating because I can't control what everybody else does. But even myself, sometimes I step over the line in one way, shape, or form, but keep on coming back to certain principles, certain ethics. So that's a good reminder. Do you have any
So,
questions? Go ahead. Sorry.
sorry, I was just going to say one more thing to add to that, and it goes right in that vein. Is think about the times that we've been sort of counseled to let something sit, right? Write an email, then go back to a little while later,
Yeah.
delete it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Take a little time to think about it. Same
Yeah.
thing, social media. If you're going to post something on social media, type it, get it off your chest, don't send it.
Right.
Spend some time with it and go back and go, wow, do I really need to do that?
Yeah.
Probably not. Delete it, right? And
Yeah.
so much what we see is reactionary, and then it gets emotional. But if we would just give grace to others and give grace to ourselves,
Yeah.
again, it's in the old days when you wrote things down with hand, right? It was write the letter
Right.
and then throw it in the trash.
That's right.
You got it off your chest.
Yeah. Abraham Lincoln is famous for having done that a few times.
Right. For good
um,
reason.
yeah. Do you have any questions for?
How would Abe have fared in the
Oh man.
world of social media? I
Oh,
mean,
that's a
here's
great
the other
question.
one. Pete Hegseth doing an emoji of, for these reporters. Come on, really?
Oh man.
Really? You are the Secretary of all Defense.
I
You're
don't
gonna
even want.
resort, you know, it's it's
Yeah.
childish. It's insane. Um, that's another good example of somebody needs to say, "Hey, get off social media. Stop doing things like that." But yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
In a permanent state of SMH, shaking my head.
yes.
That's what Abe Lincoln and George Washington would be doing right now. Do you have any questions for me?
So the question for you in the context of your podcast, and so number one, how did you come up with the name?
Oh boy, I was trying to come up with a lot of other names because this is so long and clunky. But I was it basically came up. Nobody's ever asked me that before, by the way.
Okay.
It came up because I was trying to describe to folks that I was collaborating with when we were getting it started what it was. And I just kept on saying, we're just talking about politics and religion without killing each other. And I said it so many times over and over and again, and I couldn't come up with a more distilled 2 or 3 word title that it just stayed talk politics and religion without killing each other. And then a few times I mentioned to Julie Mason, great longtime press pool reporter, and now she's on the POTUS channel on XM. And she said, "No, keep it, keep it." And I've had others. Bill Crystal exhorted me. EJ Dion told me, "No, keep it." That's why they came on. They came on the show. So, yeah.
Uh, so the second question related to the first is how, and we have the perfect example, right, of how much stuff with everything going on that we could get to that we didn't even get to in our conversation. How do you choose these podcasts and these guests that kind of keep with the theme?
So a lot of times, it's kind of like following the trail where it leads. There will be someone I read about in a book, or someone I see in the news, or someone whose work I've been following for a long time, and I'll work for a long. So in some cases, I have to work for a year or longer to gain access, and even to ask them whether they will come on the show. In other cases, it takes a little bit of work to actually get them on a lot of work to get them on the show. And then I spend a lot of time in preparation. So it's kind of like I'm not going to say that every time I prepare for an interview, it's like a dissertation, but when I've talked to folks who've gotten their PhDs, the process seems similar in that I start out with some ideas of where I want to take it. But then when I do the preparation, I'll discover things that are more imperative to cover, and then the last part of that is Monty Guzman. And when we hit pause, I'm going to ask you some questions off air about this. But I asked Monty Guzman and a couple of other great journalists and lawyers some feedback about how I can improve upon this. And Monica Guzman, who's with Braver Angels now, but also a great writer, great journalist, she said, do all the prep. That's great. But once you're in the interview, again, follow the trail where it leads. Don't become a slave to your, scripted questions. You're losing the humanity of it. So use the prep as just that, and then just kind of not quite throw it away, but get into the conversation. So.
No, that's great advice.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this was a great conversation. I knew you wouldn't disappoint. There were so many things.
Yeah.
I'm going to have you back because there's things happening in the news all the time
Well, we
that
can't wait 4 more years.
no, absolutely not. I'm going to want to bend your ear about it. So before we go, how can folks follow you? Find, I know you're going to start writing some more, just as you shared a great post on LinkedIn this morning as we record this. How can folks find you and keep up with all the great work that you're doing?
So, as you mentioned, LinkedIn, although I'm a bit, what's the word? Conflicted that in some ways LinkedIn has started to become a form of Twitter, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And when we talked 4 years ago, I was very active on Twitter. And that was kind of an outlet that I used. And then after Elon Musk bought and ruined Twitter, I got off. I'm not on Facebook pretty much anymore because it's become that way. So as much as I would like to say, yeah, LinkedIn, but frankly, what you talked about and what I posted this morning, I did so very carefully. Right?
Yeah.
I'm trying not to contribute to the divisiveness, get into attacking. I try to make these very reasoned arguments, and in a way, as I mentioned earlier, about you may disagree with my opinion, but this is my opinion, and it's informed by all these years that I spent inside the Pentagon doing these things.
Yeah.
Right. So if that means something, great. Sorry, a long answer to the fact that you can find me on LinkedIn, but I generally am cautious, but I will try to do more work on Substack. In the past, I published in Task and Purpose, The Atlantic, other organizations, and I put a plug in now. The Atlantic is, I think, one of the best outlets out there producing things along with the Bulwark.
Yeah.
I follow them, no pun intended, religiously. And because I do think that I get to see more reasoned discussions and arguments on those platforms.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage people to find those different sources of information, right? So I still read the Washington Post, but in the Wall Street Journal,
Yep.
right? I read as many things as I can to try to figure out the parts and pieces and not just rely on one source. I think more people could be better consumers of news and information and get a variety of sources rather than being part of the echo chamber. So,
well, I'm going to encourage you to go down that Substack road because you have a really informed perspective, and I know all of this, all the stuff that I've read that you've written and shared over the years has been very edifying for me, and I have found that the conversations on Substack are that the voices there, they can share in more depth and more thoughtfully, and then the conversations that are spurred from that reflect that level of thoughtfulness as well so far. But let's see, will Elon Musk buy Substack and see, which we'll have to shift over to something else down the road. But Dave, this has been great. I'm so glad that we hooked back up. I really appreciate you taking the time.
No, I appreciate you asking me back. Another great conversation. Again, we can't wait another 4 years. There's too much going on. There's too much at stake.
Too much going on. We'll be sure to stay.
But again, it goes back to the point is, there are a lot of voices out there, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you get them all in? How do you find space to hear those different perspectives, which is important.
Yeah, well, we'll be sure to stay in touch. And next time I'm in DC, I get there a couple times a year, so I'll hit you up and got to grab beers or something. Maybe, taking a hockey game or something. Yeah, there you go. Terrific. Thanks again. And as always, if you dig what we're doing, remember to follow the show. Write the review for us. Don't forget to write the reviews. It really does help. You can watch these conversations on YouTube. It's youtube.com/@politicsendreligion. And I'm at Corey S. Nathan on all the socials, at COREY, S as in Sam, NATHAN, at Corey S. Nathan, including Substack. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.